The Ghosts of Highway 20, the Swamp Mountain Jane Doe, and the Lynn County Jane Doe. Lynn County, Oregon. The Ghosts of Highway 20 is yet another case of women disappearing along the highway. Many victims of SA who met brutal ends. These cases began in the late 1970s up until the early 1990s. Usually the suspects in these cases seem to be truck drivers. But in this case, it was John Arthur Ackroyd who was responsible for some, if not all, of the cases. He was a highway mechanic with the Oregon Department of Transportation. He ended up being prosecuted for the case of Kay Turner, who perished in 1978. Kay Turner was a 35-year-old married woman who was taking a break from Christmas plans as she headed out on Christmas Eve in 1978 for an 8-mile run. The couple had joined friends at Camp Sherman, which is a retreat along the river off Highway 20. Kay was an only child raised in Oregon and was really close to her family. She was an avid runner, and she had run many a marathon, and she was excited to run along the beautiful scenery that she could see in Camp Sherman. The road was tinged red from volcanic ash, and it would be a truly scenic run. She set off and planned to be gone an hour, just in time to join her husband and her friends for breakfast. A highway worker named Thomas Hanna would spot her running south. He also spotted a coworker of his, a man named John Ackroyd. So in the meantime, Kay should have been back by 9 a.m. But by 10 a.m., she still hadn't returned. Her husband got really worried and he called the police after searching and finding her nowhere. She had shared exactly where she planned to run, but there was no sign of her at all. And this would trigger a huge search party, but despite a massive search through that area, nothing was found, and her husband was clear he believed she'd been kidnapped. The only clue as to what happened was the highway worker who spotted Kay, as well as the other highway worker he saw at that time, John Ackroyd. John Ackroyd was 29 at the time, and he'd been working for the highway department for about a year. He reportedly struggled with a special education program in high school and was often target of bullies who had a tendency to become physically aggressive with him. So as a result, he was a bit of a loner, and he got in some trouble for stealing. His mother's job working at the local police department may have helped insulate him a little bit from trouble, but eventually he found himself facing felony theft charges. To get out of this, he enlisted in the army, and he would be sent to Korea, Thailand, and later Germany. A stellar soldier he was not. He got caught selling illicit substances, and he stole equipment and supplies that he would illegally sell. Then, after this, he went AWOL. For anyone outside of the U.S. who might not understand that, it's absent without leave. He also had a history of doing disturbing things to animals, which I won't describe here, but suffice it to say, the accusations are bad. I'm not sure if he was prosecuted for going AWOL, but he ended up somehow back in the U.S. and he got the state job. For the most part, he seemed to be doing okay. He was sometimes considered to be a little bit lazy, and he took a lot of time off. I'm not sure how great it is when you're described as doing your job mostly adequately, but this is how he was described. Being a bit of a loner, it was a really good job for him. He was working along Highway 20, and as a result, he needed to take twisting and turning bends between logging towns sometimes. So he knew a lot of these roads. And this area eventually is where women would be found. It was along with those twisting and turning roads that a woman named Marlene Gabrielson was found, and she was a victim of SA the year before Kay Turner disappeared. The police would interview Ackroyd, and he would state he got off work at 6:30 a.m. He had driven through Camp Sherman that morning planning to hunt coyotes. He would say he did pass a runner when he was going through. This confirmed what they knew, so at the time, the detectives didn't seem to be concerned he had anything to do with it. They moved on to 2 extramarital relationships Kay was currently involved in at the time, focusing on those men as well as her husband. And usually that would be the case. One of those would be the one to blame. So obviously we can't really fault the investigators in this case. They found on her calendar at work recent liaisons with both of the men. There were some concerns that she may have chosen to disappear intentionally. However, the day after Christmas, some experienced trackers who joined the search would come upon the unfortunate discovery of Kay's footprints. At least, what they believed was her footprints. They notified the police that they found them and that they were well preserved in the frozen ground, reporting that they had waffle soles that would have matched Kay's Nikes. And he said the prints were mingled with others that belonged to a large man. And they believed from the footprints that the woman was being dragged. telling anyone who would listen what they found, and they were ordered by the police just to drop the matter. The police were clear that they didn't believe they'd found anything of value to the case. And that part, I would say, is unfortunate. With the footprints dismissed, all the leads were gone. It seems strange, but they didn't check them out at all. 8 months would pass, then Aykroyd walked into the Camp Sherman store and was behaving very strangely. His face was beaded with sweat, despite the cooler weather outside. The shopkeeper would recognize him. He was a little strange. He would come in and just stare at the covers of explicit magazines that were sold in the store. One of those times he was found touching himself. On this day, Aykroyd would make the claim that he'd found Kay Turner's remains in the woods when he was out hunting for rabbits with his dog. This would stand out to the shopkeeper, as it was well known the area he was discussing was not one where rabbits were even likely to be found. She thought it was odd because Aykroyd was an experienced hunter. He would have known that area didn't make sense for what he claimed to be hunting. He would tell the shopkeeper, a woman named Weston, that he was in trouble as he was the last person to see her alive and now he'd found her. It was a disturbing exchange and she would call the police to report this. She would share that Aykroyd was lamenting how unfair it was that he had to be the one to find her. I don't know if anyone addressed how weird it was that he didn't contact the police. When the police went to investigate, they were struck by how those remains presented themselves. The way they were piled together, they insisted that a hunter would dismiss the bits of cloth and bones as trash and animal carcasses. It did not appear it was a person. So then the question was how he could have known it was a person, much less the missing person he had last seen. After a week, they would manage to gather a lower jawbone and some of her clothing as well as a sneaker. They would say a violent event seemed to cause her watch to become damaged and stop working on December 24th, 1978 at 9:27 a.m. Blonde hair was found built into a nearby bird's nest. 12 long years would pass without anyone paying for taking Kay's life. Then a man named Dale Beck broke the case wide open when he started bragging about the event, especially when he was inebriated and wanting to threaten others around him. It didn't help that around this same time, Aykroyd's teen stepdaughter disappeared, and once again he was the last known person to see someone alive. So why am I stating it this way if the story is about 2 unidentified Jane Does? It ties in here because there are other cases. We have 2 Jane Does and others who are missing. It's entirely possible that there's even more than this that's known. All of their stories are sometimes called the ghosts of Highway 20. 2 of those missing individuals were Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson. The 2 were 17 and 19, and they had gone on a camping trip to Beverly Beach State Park with the family of Melissa Sanders, and this was in the spring of 1992. It appears the girls found the trip to be a bit boring, and the 2 snuck off and were picked up by someone they described as a friend. The 2 were never seen again, but suspicion would grow over time that Aykroyd was the person picking them up. In the end, Beck was prosecuted and so was Aykroyd, though only initially for taking the life of Kay Turner. The 2 young campers I mentioned, Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson, they lived inland from Highway 20, and they frequently went to Sherry's restaurant in that area. They were often there when another frequent customer came in, once again John Arthur Aykroyd, and he was linked closely to someone else who disappeared. Even worse, on the same day they went missing, a witness would report seeing him covered in blood. He had explained that away, claiming that he ran into a deer so he had to gut him out. When asked what happened to the carcass, he would say he threw it in the brush along the highway. And there's no indication that was ever found. The 2 women would eventually be found on a logging trail, once again off Highway 20. Aykroyd was seen 3 times in the area very close to where remains were found. Evidence also suggested he had met the girls earlier and offered them a ride to a party that he claimed to be hosting. Aykroyd would eventually be charged with his stepdaughter's disappearance, as they were able to disprove his alibi. Friends of Rashonda's testified that she confided in them about the abuse that was going on at home, perpetrated by her stepdad. Her brother would relate during this trial the misery of living with a sociopath who made the kids miserable while providing stability for their mom. Rashonda used to carry around her clothes in a backpack in hopes she would be able to wrangle a visit to stay with other friends. The 2 siblings used to dream of escaping the nightmare, and her brother took the stand to share the pain of their childhood. In the end, Aykroyd would plead no contest to taking her life, neither denying or admitting it, and in exchange for this plea, he was not able to seek parole. At the same time, Aykroyd's former buddy Beck found himself in prison also despite trying to get out. They had refused to let him out each time of the 4 times he tried, always because he didn't take responsibility for Kay. He had a lot of feelings about a lot of things, all of which was about how unfair it was to him. He didn't like to take the time to dwell on Kay Turner, and he definitely had no desire to take responsibility for any of it. This is what tied him to prison. His lack of remorse did him in. Couldn't happen to a more deserving guy. He was more concerned for those who testified, swearing revenge against them, raging at his own sisters, who he never forgave for testifying against him. When he did spare Kay a thought, it was to insist that he'd never met her. If his buddy did something to her, oh well. It had nothing to do with him. But the question would remain, how many others were there? There are 2 Jane Does yet to be identified that I'll address soon, but there's also other missing person cases. Elizabeth Musler was just 22 when she disappeared. She was eventually found in a shallow grave, not far from Highway 10, within the woods that Aykroyd frequented as part of his job. All of these young people were just starting their lives out. The 2 other teens believed to be related went missing in 1977. Karen Lee and Rodney Grissom are shown on the screen. They ran away with big plans to move to California. They would place a call home from Lebanon, Oregon, and that was the last time any of their families heard from them again. But it wasn't the last time that their belongings were seen. Karen used to write in a journal, and some of the pages were found off a logging road, as well as the blouse she had sewn for a school project. Jeans that lay there had been cut off its owner, and this matched circumstances in a local SA victim that wasn't prosecuted. It also matched the case of Kay Turner's yellow jogging shorts. They too had been cut off. Later on, some of Rodney's belongings would be found, and those can be seen here. Karen's mother had long believed her daughter was abducted and eventually had her life stolen by Aykroyd. They had been assured a ride by someone in the area, but that person could never be identified. Karen's mother is convinced that it was Aykroyd. Out of the chances, they gave it one more shot. A detective went to see him in prison, asking about other victims beyond the ones he'd been convicted of. He would say, "I never killed anybody in my life," saying he thought about it, but he never did so. He would shift directions to the man's still missing stepdaughter, Rashonda Pickle, who has never been found, going missing when the 2 were home alone at Aykroyd's house. He would ask Aykroyd point blank, "So you don't know where she's at?" To which Aykroyd would reply, "I wish I knew." When the detective said, "Oh, I think you do," there was a fit of temper, and Aykroyd heaved himself from the chair and demanded that he be returned to his cell. This was the last chance to find Rashonda Pickle's remains, and it failed. It also leaves the 2 victims behind that I'm going to cover now. Not only has there been no justice, but the names are unknown. The first case is a Swamp Mountain Jane Doe, Lynn County, Oregon. Neither of our Jane Does have a lot of information, but they've been tied to the ghosts of Highway 20, so I don't think you can mention one without the other. The first of the 2 Lynn County Jane Does is the Swamp Mountain one here. The location she was found in was both near Highway 20 and Sweetwater, Oregon in Lynn County. According to a newspaper article, only some partial bones were ever found. However, Jane Doe 1 has a lot of recreations. Why they chose to genetically recreate her and not the second case, but it's entirely possible they were unable to get DNA that they were able to use. It's so hard with bones that are older, especially if they've been outside. Jane Doe 1 was found on July 24th, 1976, but the postmortem interval could have been as long as 10 years, meaning she may have perished 10 years prior to being found. Her age range is wide too, which doesn't help. They placed her at 18 to 40. From the year found would mean a date of birth 1936 to 1948. But this is all for someone who went missing in 1976. She could have been there as long ago as 1966, which places everything down 10 years, with the missing loved one being born between 1926 and 1948. Expanding it to meaning the missing loved one would have been born between 1926 and 1948. But these are always estimates, and anyone missing a loved one should submit their DNA to NamUs. Because her DNA was done, we know she was white and of Native American descent. Her DNA also indicates she had either brown eyes or hazel eyes, and she was short in stature. They've been running comparisons with the DNA for years, and so far they've ruled out 19 women. The only other clues as to who she was a fringed leather coat, Levi's, platform sandals, and some random clothing and jewelry items. In this case, there's enough similarities to strongly believe she's related to the other cases I covered. Our final Jane Doe, also tied to this case, is the Lynn County Jane Doe, 1978. I wish there was a Parabon snapshot of our Jane Doe, like the previous case, and so that, of course, makes me question that there's DNA on the case at all. According to the Doe Network, there's not. I wish I knew if they tried to get some. I suspect they probably did if they did the other case. We know that she was located in a forested area off Highway 20 in eastern Lynn County. All of these cases appear to take place in Lynn County, and a few less clear cases are also related that I'm not mentioning. Jane Doe number 2's skull was found on April 27, 1978, off U.S. Route 20 in eastern Lynn County, Oregon. It was initially speculated that she was the missing woman, Karen Lee, and this is the woman who went missing with her male friend. However, this was eventually ruled out, likely through dental films. She's listed as 18 to 99, so there's obviously no real age, and the post-mortem interval is just listed as years. So randomly choosing a date seems to be the closest I can get. If she was there 2 years post-mortem and she was 18, it would mean her date of birth was as late as 1958. But it was most likely prior to this. But she's definitely someone who went missing from their family in 1977 or earlier. The Lynn County Jane Doe has gone unidentified for 46 years. The Swamp Mountain Jane Doe has gone unidentified for 47 years. If anyone knows who either of these women might be, please call the number on your screen. Huge thanks for watching all the way to the end, and a big thanks to all of you who consistently like and comment on the videos. Whether you leave a full comment or an emoji, it makes a huge difference. So if you consistently watch my videos, maybe take a moment to subscribe. It's a huge push toward the videos being suggested to new people. The next goal is 20,000. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other.